you as a juror are not supposed to judge the law. Merely analyze what happened and determine if the person violated the law.
I knew a couple guys in high school that for a very short time decided they were going to sell marijuana because they weren't smokers and they thought, oh, we're not going to smoke up our profits or whatever. And they opened a bank account for their marijuana money.
Of course, I completely regret that decision because I put a man in jail by my decision.
You had this Brock Turner guy that was like witnessed violently raping somebody, showing sociopathic characteristics, and the judge let him off with a slap on the wrist effectively because he was a good swimmer.
So if I was like, jury nullification, bring down the system, it would have like completely destroyed everything. They'd have to like get rid of everybody and start anew.
I've heard stories of people sitting there waiting to get selected for jury duty, and they'll come up and ask a question like, do you think black people are treated unfairly by the police? And you're like, well, yeah, I do actually. And they're like, well, sorry, you're not for this jury then. So here I am getting pulled over in what looks like a stolen van. And I'm not exactly the most chipper guy with, authorities like the police, as you may have guessed.
Game the system if you can, because it's gaming you back.
Yep.
So that's all I got to say. Suck it, suckers.
Welcome to another Kitchen Sink Microscopy. I'm Casey Rochford.
And I'm Eric Rosenblatt. And don't forget, we write our own music. So stick around to the end of the show and check out what we've got to offer for today. And like, share, subscribe, do all that good stuff. Go to patreon.com/KSMvidcast and contribute to the show. Keep it going.
All right. So what's on your mind today? Got anything interesting to discuss?
Ooh, yeah. This is gonna be a good one. And it's something probably not a lot of people are actually aware of, and maybe they have a lot of misconceptions about. So I think it would be interesting to talk about and clear the air on this. But I've noticed that there's a lot of news going on, and it's probably the upcoming election, presidential election. Everybody's kind of, I guess, there a lot of politicians who are running have this particular platform or this thing as one of their platforms, which is criminal justice reform, or reforming that whole system, reducing sentences or eliminating punishment for certain things or whatnot. And it got me to thinking about the topic of jury nullification.
Yeah, that is definitely like something we've kind of touched on a few times briefly and never really gone into. And I think this ties into the episode we did on, kind of like a prison reform brainstorming a little while back. That was it ties in nicely, I think.
Yeah, and I think it also ties into the couple episodes we did about various types of prohibition.
Yeah.
Because there is a link there.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Like, well, there's this huge overcrowding problem, and a good chunk of these people are in prison for things that are arguably, and this is where the jury nullification is going to come in, arguably really stupid to be incarcerated for. And in some cases now, in whatever jurisdiction they were arrested in, things have become legal, such as marijuana, and a few of these sentences are starting to get reversed.
Yeah.
Released. So
So I just want to, maybe I should explain to viewers that don't know what jury nullification is, because maybe people have heard the term, but or maybe they've heard a couple things about it, but they probably don't understand what it actually is. Um, in a nutshell, jury nullification is the concept that as a juror in a trial, you though you know that the person did technically commit the crime, you know that according to the state and the law, they're guilty of a particular crime. You, as a person, a moral person or a logical person, conclude that that law is unjust. And then, so your course of action as a juror is to submit, uh, basically say that they're not guilty. And so in essence, the nullification aspect of it comes from a number of court cases coming up over and over and over again. And essentially they're unable to put people in prison for a particular crime because nobody will, there's enough people essentially nullifying that law that it's just not possible anymore. And it gets reversed in time.
Hmm.
I guess that's kind of a simplified version, but that's
Yeah.
essentially it.
So yeah, I think that's one of the things that like more people need to be aware of, because I feel very strongly that we should understand our own laws and be equipped with them in our tool belt, because uh, you know they can be used against you if you don't understand them.
Mm.
And you could be the one on trial, for instance, for something that's kind of ridiculous,
Yeah.
but it is the law nonetheless. And would you want to end up in a situation where, yes, you did technically commit that crime, but you're going to do a significant amount of time for something that was potentially victimless,
Yeah.
more than likely
Yeah.
victimless?
Where all parties were consensual, that's,
Yeah.
or anything, maybe it's something where, I don't know, let's say there was a law that said, well, there are actually the fugitive slave laws that existed, like you had to return runaway slaves, or you go to jail for that or prison for it. That was a thing, and jury nullification pretty much killed that. um, and so that's the thing, like you kind of, that's the idea, is you sort of analyze whether the law is just or not, because sometimes, well, actually, in fact, there are very few laws that I think are truly objectively just. There's always some kind of motivation behind those laws, and it's not altruism. It's there's selfish reasons for all of those things. um,
Mhm.
have you ever been on a jury before?
I have not. I usually was like a student or something when I got called up, and typically that, since you don't get paid to be a student, you're actually paying to be the student. I think they usually just let you off for that. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, the only two times I got called up, I was a student, I think. So I haven't actually been able to give it a shot.
So I've done it once, um, and unfortunately, was working at a job that didn't pay anything for jury time. It was a very small business, so they didn't have the resources to pay for that. Everybody else on the jury did, and this is something I want to get into, actually, probably early on. But so I was on this jury, and the very first thing that was essentially drilled into our heads over and over and over again is, you as a juror are not supposed to judge the law. Merely analyze what happened and determine if the person violated the law. And they kept on, and there it was a very thorough interview process too, that was kind of essentially weeding out people who might be free thinkers, I guess.
Hmm.
um and I kind of just played along because I had never been on a jury, so I was like, well, I'll probably of course I'm going to use my own logic on this, but at the same time, there's a lot of pressure because, especially as somebody, I was pretty young and inexperienced and didn't know anything about stuff that I know about now. But they select people and then they cut people out because they seem too biased or whatever. And then in the end, you're assigned to a particular case, and then you go through all the court proceedings and all that stuff, and you deliberate and sit and talk and whatever. And that was actually a kind of an interesting thing. And then this was a drug case, of course. And at the time I was like, well, yeah, of course they have video evidence of this guy selling drugs. Like, yeah, I guess he's guilty. And now, of course, I completely regret that decision because I put a man in jail by my decision. Like, I could have been the person to change that. And dude, if you're out there, I'm sorry. I'll just say that.
Well, I will say that selling drugs technically is also wrong for the whole tax evasion thing. So you could theoretically justify it that way, like, oh, he's not contributing his fair share. So,
but even that's kind of subjective too. It's like,
yeah, and it is a little harsh.
yeah, exactly. Like, what about a fine? Come on.
Yeah, I mean, like, you didn't pay money. Okay, well, now pay the money.
Yeah, well, you say tax evasion, but think about this. Imagine you file your taxes as a business owner and you say, yeah, here's the money I made from selling crack. Here you go, IRS. Here's your portion of the money I made selling crack. Nobody would do that. So of course they're not paying taxes. So I wouldn't accept that argument as a legitimate reason to put somebody in jail or whatever.
I knew a couple guys in high school that for a very short time decided they were going to sell marijuana because they weren't smokers, and they thought, oh, we're not going to smoke up our profits or whatever. And they opened a bank account for their marijuana money.
Oh, man. Yeah. Yeah.
So
that's an interesting story. We will have to discuss that sometime. Yeah. I don't know if the viewers could see the gesture, but maybe that's
what gesture.
I don't. It was something like that, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, I was thinking about jury nullification earlier, and I kind of thought, in a way, sometimes there already is a bit of a jury nullification on the judge's end, because as I understand it, the jury comes with the verdict and the judge takes the verdict and applies a sentence based on the verdict, right?
Yeah, for the most part, based on,
depending on the type of court it is or whatever.
Yeah, and like legal precedent and the laws, like minimum and maximum stuff. They have a little bit of leeway there.
Yeah. So sometimes you'll see the judge show leniency for stuff, depending on extenuating circumstances or whatnot. But the problem I see with allowing that to be your de facto nullification is that it's one person making a choice, and usually I don't know, historically, letting one person make the big decisions is not as good as, I don't know, 12 people per se, or however many, because, like, case in point, you had this Brock Turner guy that was like witnessed violently raping somebody, showing sociopathic characteristics, and the judge let him off with a slap on the wrist, effectively, because he was a good swimmer. So like, that's a good example of leaving it to just one person's interpretation of the situation. Like, that's why jury nullification is actually really important to know about, because you can discuss it with the other 11 people try to get them on board with what you're talking about.
Yeah, actually, that's a good point. And I think in the US, our legal system is based on the premise that it's better to let a whole bunch of criminals go free than to wrongly imprison one person. And I just
On
actually read.
paper, yes, that's how it is.
Well, I mean, think about it. Like, I don't know. That's a huge philosophical discussion, but I strongly believe in that because the implications of if you have the opposite sort of system that's basically bent on getting every single bad guy
Well,
come hell or
what
high
I'm
water.
saying. That's
Like,
what I'm saying. That's the system we actually have. On paper, it may be the way
yeah,
you described it, but in reality, it's more like, oh, you had some marijuana, huh? Here's a prison sentence for you.
yeah, kill 100 innocent people to get one guilty person. That's essentially
Yeah.
what it is. And it's kind of sad it's come to that. And actually, so here's the thing that I was doing a little bit of reading about this again, and so it used to be a long time ago. In fact, before the founding of this country, the jury nullification goes back at least as far as the Magna Carta, probably further. Um, so it's not something new, and it's not something unique to the United States, this particular principle. Um, but it was sort of essentially, historically, it was told to the jurors that you're supposed to analyze the law at the same time as you analyze the facts of the case. And then I think during like the late 1800s, like the early 1900s or something, there were some union organizers that were arrested and all this stuff, and there were these court cases, and these large businesses kind of persuaded, let's say, the politicians in charge of this system to enact legislation to change that. So, in fact, I think it was 1895, there was a Supreme Court decision that required courts to no longer inform juries that they had the power to veto unjust laws. And ever since then, they tell us the absolute opposite of that you're supposed to just basically be a robot.
So, so is it technically illegal to perform the act of jury nullification, or is it just illegal to tell people they can?
It's illegal to tell people that they can, in as a person who works for the courts. Basically, the court itself can't tell people that. There's a little bit of grayness, I think. I'm not quite sure of all of the details and the legal precedent over time, as far as the legality of basically just brazenly proclaiming, I'm using jury nullification and this guy is innocent, that kind of thing. But a juror can't be punished for their decision. I do know that, and there is legal precedent for that. So
Yeah.
if you're maybe silent about it, and you just say, yeah, not guilty, then they can't do anything to you.
Yeah.
But the thing is, us even talking about this is still, we'll get some feathers ruffled, I think, because they do not want people to talk about this. So, and I wonder why,
Well, it's because they feel like they need to be in total control,
Mm-hmm.
and really, deciding which laws are just and which aren't. I'm going to go back to what I said earlier. Like the more people you have involved in deciding something, moral or ethical or legal or whatever, the better your outcome is going to be.
Or the more just, let's
Right.
say.
Yeah. The more just.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the better. If you're the state, the outcome would be bad if you have a bunch of intelligent people deciding a case like that. Um, so, and the thing is, it makes me wonder. I would ask people who run the courts today, like, what's the purpose of a jury? Because if you look at the constitutional framework around the jury, it's supposed to be a jury of your peers. And maybe today there's a loose interpretation of the definition of the word peer, but to me it means somebody who's like similar to you. Like maybe they live in your same neighborhood, maybe they're the same socioeconomic status as you, or something. They're on par with you in some level. That you, and the thing that I noticed, this is the thing. So the court case that I was involved in was a black man who was in a lower economic area, kind of a poor neighborhood, and he's selling crack. He's definitely not a Wall Street tycoon,
Mhm.
so, and I'm not going to prejudge anybody, but probably not Harvard educated. So, but the interesting thing is, apart from myself, who has never completed 4-year college, and just worked like regular jobs all my life, everybody else that was on that jury, there were people who were like Boeing engineers. There were people who worked for the state. There were people, like office jobs and stuff, and not one of them was anywhere resembling this guy.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of thing that I think, like, if the jury that we're selecting to judge someone is completely different, they're living in like a bubble, like they have the ivory tower experience, like how are they going to judge this particular person? If I was a juror on that case and half of those people were poor black people, I'd feel a little bit more like the playing field was a little bit more level at that point, you know?
Yeah, it's you, you know what really clogs my kitchen sink is that they they cherry pick who they want on the jury. It's not random the way it should be.
Mm-mm.
Like like what you're describing would be kind of cherry picking in the other direction, like selecting people that are very similar to the defendant. And I think the way it's structured, the way it's set up, at least as far as sending out notices for jury duty, is completely random and therefore gives you like the most fair chance at a mix of subjectivity in either direction and
Yeah.
objectivity, like people right down the middle or something. But you go in, I've heard stories like, let's say there's a black defendant. I've heard stories of people sitting there waiting to get selected for jury duty, and they'll come up and ask a question like, do you think black people are treated unfairly by the police? And you're like, well, yeah, I do actually. And they're like, well, sorry, you're not for this jury then. Like
Yeah.
they basically take someone who sounds like they might side with the defendant,
Yep.
shoo them away.
Yeah. And now on the particular case that I was involved in, I didn't experience that specific thing having to do with skin color, but I too have heard stories about it. But what I did see was definitely the sort of systematic elimination of anybody who might challenge the system. The questions were very, very carefully worded to elicit, or I guess to basically analyze the person, and using the particular system they had in place, cut out anyone who would be who would basically have a different interpretation. I mean, it was pretty extensive, and at the time I wasn't really questioning it because this is the first time I've been on a jury, actually the last time too, but I didn't, so I didn't know how to handle it. But nowadays I would totally handle it completely differently. And I keep on like over the years, I'd kind of like figured out ways around getting around jury duty, because for some stupid reason, I keep getting selected. It's happened like 10 times in my lifetime.
Wow.
Yeah, and nowadays I'd be like, oh hell yeah, bring it on. I'm gonna fake my way through this until I get on a court case, and when I see something involving any victimless crime, well, never mind. I'm not gonna say anything, because that'll if anybody watches this channel, they're gonna yeah, if you're somebody working for the court system and you're watching this channel, I absolutely love the judicial process, and I'm a non-biased person, and I will cooperate 100%, and I will never put my own biased views into the case. I will only judge the case based on the law and the facts, and that's it. Yep. Okay. Case closed.
I think the law is always right.
Oh yeah, it's so that's the thing. It's like it. I mean, it goes back to this whole thing. Like, what is the purpose of a jury?
Right.
If all the jury is supposed to do is look at the facts and determine whether somebody committed that particular crime, whether they broke the law, well, you could have an algorithm do that, or the judge could do that, or you could either. You don't need a jury. So if you think about it, why was the jury created to begin with, and why was it a jury of your peers? There are definite reasons for that. I can say from a little limited research, the founders of this country, the United States, believed strongly in the concept of jury nullification. That was the whole entire point. If you start reading it, you'll figure it out quick that that's exactly what they wanted, and that's why it's such an important component. It's sort of the last line of defense against tyrannical laws or something like that. That Thomas Jefferson was an advocate of it.
If you don't push back, then they'll just keep mowing over you. I'm a big advocate for taking the law into your own hands, and by that I don't mean vigilante justice where you play judge, jury, and executioner based on your whims. I mean, understand the law as it exists and use it to your advantage, because there are things in the law like jury nullification that you may not know about, and you can use it to help others or help yourself.
Knowledge is power.
Case in point, one time you and I were discussing laws about rules of the road in particular, and I came across an RCW, that's the Washington Code, that had to do with crosswalks, like unmarked crosswalks. And one day I was driving to work and I was running late, and some guy stopped at an unmarked crosswalk because somebody was waiting to cross, and he wanted them to like go in front of him, and he was holding up traffic and stuff. And I know this was wrong. I knew it at the time, but I was running late, and I passed him on the right, which is dangerous, and I shouldn't have done it. Turned out he was an undercover cop, and he pulled me over. Now, at the time, this is a little bit of a digression, but it's pretty funny. At the time, I was driving a minivan that I got from my mechanic, and it had a lien on it, and the place it had a lien on was bankrupt and just off the grid. Like, you couldn't find them, so he couldn't get the title to give to me, so I couldn't register it, I couldn't insure it, and it basically looked like I was driving a stolen van, right? So here I am getting pulled over in what looks like a stolen van, and I'm not exactly the most chipper guy with authorities like the police, as you may have guessed.
You don't say.
And I was respectful but blunt. He said, "Do you know why I pulled you over?" I was like, "Well, yeah, I passed on the right, and I know that was dangerous and against the law, but I was running late and you stopped in the middle of the road." And he was like, "Well, I was stopping because there was a pedestrian and you're supposed to do that." And I was like, "Actually, no, you're not. and I spit out the RCW number because it was fresh in my head. And I said, you're not supposed to obstruct traffic unless there's a marked crosswalk or they're already in the right of way, which that person was not. And he was like, oh, well, you're lucky I'm off duty, so you can go. But like, this is all after I had to like give him the dog and pony show about why I didn't have a title or insurance or anything. And he bought that, luckily.
Nice.
Yeah, but the point is, I knew the law better than the cop did. And that was enough. Like, you know, I respectfully explained it to him, of course, you know, so I didn't anger him per se, but it was enough to get me off of a ticket because, you know, I had him, you know.
Well, and
we were kind of at a stalemate. I did something illegal and so did he.
Yeah, and if you start spouting RCWs to a cop, he's going to think, or she is going to think that you're a lawyer. And they're going to be like, oh, I'm not going to touch this with a 10-foot pole. Like, I don't want to get near this. This is a lawsuit waiting to happen. Like, no, this isn't even worth it unless they've murdered somebody or stolen something.
Yeah, you know, for common things that you might get pulled over for, I used to keep RCWs printed out in my glove box so I could have them at the ready to cite different laws. Like, oh, you pulled me over for this, but technically, you know.
Nice, you know, and that's the thing, because the whole entire system is so nitpicky, you might as well nitpick back.
Exactly.
A lot of these things are completely dumb. So, yeah, totally game the system if you can, because it's gaming you back.
Yep.
So that's all I got to say. Suck it, suckers. But that aside, yeah. So one thing I found out, and I didn't know this, in researching a little bit the topic of jury nullification, that it was, well, there's two things actually. I'll start with the quicker one. That during Prohibition, jury nullification was extensively employed to basically dismiss cases that against alcohol manufacturers or sellers or rum runners or whatever, because, you know, people like to drink, and it was a stupid ass thing. That amendment was completely dumb, and everybody knew it, and, you know, it was some kind of Puritan mistake that I don't know, some strange thing happened. But the fact that so many people struck down these cases, essentially it's some people believe that it's pretty much a major factor in ending Prohibition, because they couldn't convict anybody. It just wasn't possible. So this is something we have to remember, and
that's huge, because so many people want marijuana legalized on the federal level, and this is a way that people could actually affect change in their favor. And you know, like, if you're watching this and you're of that mentality where you want to see that happen, share this video and be really loud about it too. Be like, hey, here's a way that we could all do our part to get rid of some stupid laws.
Yeah, and remember, if you're going to employ jury nullification, don't tell anyone about it. Smile and nod, pretend that you're cooperating, and then just do what you think is right.
Right. The first rule of jury nullification is don't talk about jury nullification.
Exactly. It's totally true. Yeah, because that'll get you kicked out of the jury very, very fast if you say anything about that. I mean, because they don't want you to say that, and they definitely don't want you to infect everybody else on the jury at the same time. Because it's sort of like, at least in my case, there was this huge room full of people. There were like hundreds of people in there, and so if I was like, jury nullification, bring down the system, it would have like completely destroyed everything. They'd have to like get rid of everybody and start anew. Actually, I kind of want to try that sometime. So next time, Washington State, next time you send me one of those, get ready. It's going to be fun.
Yeah, that's one hurdle though, right? Because a jury has to return a unanimous decision, correct? It's not a majority.
Well, yeah, I guess it depends on the situation, but in general, yeah. Yeah, so
Okay.
one person could completely dismiss the case.
Yeah.
Yeah, all it takes is one for those kinds of situations. So that's the force of one in that case. Like army of one. Let's use the military slogan against them. Um, yeah, and and also another thing in looking into this, and this is something I've known about because vaguely, like I kind of remember this from reading about it in the history books, but they kind of downplay it, unfortunately, because this is actually really, really, really important. During the like pre-Civil War days and post-Civil War days, I mentioned the fugitive slave laws and stuff like that. The abolitionists employed jury nullification to essentially, I guess, like dismiss the same cases against these the Underground Railroad, people who were harboring fugitive slaves and stuff like that, and working with them. I've heard. I got in a conversation with somebody about this one time, and they said, "Well, that's how the KKK, like that's how they got their people off for doing bad things." And I think, well, yeah, that's really shitty, but I mean, the net benefit is that the abolitionist movement won as a result of using this, because there were laws, like even law enforcement officers who did not arrest people for these things, they could be punished too. So
Wow.
it's not just the people harboring the slaves and helping them move around and stuff. No, if you're a law enforcement officer and you don't arrest somebody for this, you could be punished. So I mean, it was just all over the place. It was a huge mess, and due to, I would say, I would argue, probably illogically so, but with incomplete information. But I think this is valid, that um, jury nullification is the reason why that movement was successful and why there are no slaves today.
Hmm.
So I think that's a good thing. And
Yeah.
speaking of abolitionism, I'm going to quote somebody, which I have to read it because it's a long statement. Because I saw this and I was like, this is actually really good, and it's still relevant today. Lysander Spooner, an abolitionist from back in the day, he said of this subject, uh, the only principle upon which these questions are asked is this: that no man shall be allowed to serve as juror unless he be ready to enforce any enactment of the government, however cruel or tyrannical it may be. A jury like that is palpably nothing more than a tool of oppression in the hands of the government. And I think that's a pretty poignant statement. Um, that's, oh, hi. Floyd agrees. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Who said that?
Lysander Spooner. He's an abolitionist from quite a while ago.
Was he the big spoon or the little spoon?
Yeah, everybody should look him up. Actually, he's a really interesting guy. So definitely, like, if you don't know who he is, he's pretty important.
Hmm.
And they don't teach enough about him. So
Cool. Well,
mhm.
I think we hit a lot of good points tonight,
Mm-hmm.
and I just want to reiterate, if you've made it this far and you're liking what you hear, you should share this video, because this is a really important message to get out there. Boost the signal.
Yeah, exactly. And definitely feel free to keep the conversation going. we didn't really cover all of the topics or all of the angles, so I'd like to hear other opinions and get a little bit more input, maybe hear some stories. Actually, I'd like to hear people's stories about that particular thing we were talking about that jury selection process, or maybe somebody's experience being on a jury, like whatever. I it's a fascinating thing, so share
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, and we'll definitely have way more topics related to this, how to utilize the law to our advantage and how to make the most of holding our government accountable and things like that. So this has been a pretty interesting conversation, I
Yeah.
think.
Oh yeah.
So, thanks for deep sink diving with us into the topic of jury nullification. And don't forget to enjoy the song on the way out.
Yeah, like, share, subscribe, and all that good stuff. And everybody have a good day.